Hello, horror listeners. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for the channel. Also, make sure to tell us in the comments how you like the story and from where you are watching or listening. If you want to hear any specific story, feel free to request it. Now let's begin the story. I was 16 years old the summer my brother and I stopped sleeping through the night. Growing up in Ashwood, Ohio, a small town about an hour outside of Columbus, life had always been ordinary. The kind of place where the loudest thing you'd hear at night was the distant whistle of a train or the hum of cicadas pressing against the dark. Everyone knew each other's last names. Kids rode their bikes in circles around the same 3 blocks, and most families showed up at the Friday night football games even if they didn't have anyone on the team. For me, though, my world didn't revolve around Ashwood. It revolved around my brother Evan. Evan was only 13 months older than me. We weren't twins, but people often asked if we were. He was leaner, sharper around the eyes and jawline, his hair dark and always annoyingly in place. I had lighter hair, a softer face, and this perpetual look of exhaustion, even when I wasn't tired. Growing up, it was like everyone expected us to come as a set. Teachers would pair us together for projects. Neighbors always said, "There go the Carter boys." We were close, too close sometimes. Our house was a 2-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, but somehow Evan and I always ended up sharing one. Dad had claimed one room for his home office years back when his accounting business started picking up. My little sister Lily had the other. Mom always promised that one day, when the business got its own office downtown, we'd each have our own space. But that day never came. So there we were, teenage boys still stacked on bunk beds like little kids. Evan on the bottom, me on the top. It sounds stupid, but those bunks defined us. He hated when I climbed down in the middle of the night, brushing his arm as I searched for the ladder in the dark. I hated the way he thrashed in his sleep, shaking the whole frame. There were nights I wished desperately for my own room, but at the same time, I don't know if I could have handled the silence without him breathing beneath me. By the time that summer rolled around, Evan was the social one, always texting, sneaking out to meet friends, sneaking back in with that smug grin. He was the kind of guy teachers liked but never trusted. Me? I was quieter, stayed in, played old video games on my cracked Android phone, lost in pixel worlds while everyone else was out living their lives. The summer nights in Ashwood were thick with heat. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on the roof. Evan would strip to his boxers, kick the blankets off, and mutter that the ceiling fan was just moving the hot air around. I'd lie on the top bunk, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight bleeding through our curtains, listening to his breathing. That sound, his breathing. I knew it better than anything. Steady, rhythmic, rising and falling with the mattress springs creaking beneath me. And then came the night when that breathing didn't belong to him. It was a Friday. Evan had gone out with his girlfriend, Madison. He always promised he'd be back before curfew, and he never was. I stayed in, replaying Final Fantasy on an emulator, the glow of the screen lighting the ceiling just above my face. Midnight crept past. 1, then 2. Finally, exhaustion pulled me down. I shoved the phone under my pillow and let my eyes close. When I woke, it was to the sound of movement below me. The springs of the bottom bunk groaned as Evan rolled over. His breathing was steady, almost exaggerated, like he'd fallen into one of those deep, dreamless sleeps. I groaned quietly, grabbed my phone, and noticed a little green light blinking. A notification. It was a text from Evan. "Evan, running late. Don't tell Dad. Cover for me." I blinked hard, the sleep haze evaporating. My eyes drifted down to the bunk below. His silhouette was right there, chest rising and falling. I typed back. "Me. Ha ha ha. Funny. You're literally under me right now." The reply was instant. "Evan, no, I'm not. I'm still at Madison's. Not joking. Stay quiet. If someone's in the room, get out." My stomach turned to ice. The air around me felt heavy. I leaned over, peering down into the darkness. The shape under the blanket shifted, slow, deliberate. The sound of breathing filled the room, deep, steady, too steady. I didn't think. I jumped. My body hurled itself from the top bunk, hitting the floor with a thud. Pain shot up my leg, but adrenaline carried me to the door. I yanked it open, light from the hallway spilling in. The bottom bunk was empty. The blanket lay flat, no rise, no fall. I tore it back. Nothing. Closet empty. Under the bed, dust. But I had heard it. I had seen it. I bolted down the hall, pounding on my parents' door. "Dad! Dad! Someone was in the room!" My voice cracked, desperate. The door flew open, and Dad's face appeared. Tired, but instantly sharp. "What do you mean, someone?" "I thought it was Evan, but he just texted me. He's not here. Someone was breathing." Dad's expression changed, like a switch flipped. He grabbed the baseball bat from the corner. "Stay with your mother." We searched the entire house. Every closet, bathroom, the basement, the garage. Nothing. No open windows, no broken locks, no sign of forced entry. By the time we were done, sweat clung to my shirt. Mom rubbed my back, whispering, "Maybe it was a dream, sweetheart." I wasn't dreaming. My voice was hollow. An hour later, the front door opened. Evan stumbled in, reeking of Madison's perfume, shirt wrinkled. "What's going on?" he asked, eyebrows raised at the sight of Dad with the bat. Dad's glare was sharp. "Your brother says you weren't home, but he also says someone was in your bed. Explain." "I wasn't home," Evan said firmly. "I told him. I was at Madison's." My throat tightened. "Then who the hell was in your bed?" No one answered. I tried to push it away, convinced myself maybe I'd imagined it, but I couldn't. Every night I'd lie awake, listening to the silence, waiting for that breathing, and then it happened again. And again. Sometimes I'd hear the weight shift on the springs below. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of whispered words too faint to catch. One night, I swear I saw a shadow rise from the bunk and stand perfectly still in the corner, watching. Evan started to believe me when he woke up one night to the sound of two sets of breathing, mine from above, and another slow and deliberate below him. We begged Dad to let us sleep in separate rooms, but he brushed it off as teen paranoia. Mom prayed over the house. Lily said she heard someone walking in the hallway at night, but no one did anything. It was late August. The air was heavy, storms rolling in from the west. Evan was home that night. We'd made a pact not to leave each other alone anymore. We lay in our bunks, neither of us speaking, listening to the ceiling fan hum. Then it came, the sound of breathing, not mine, not his, from the middle of the room. We both sat up at once, eyes locking in the dark. Evan whispered, "You hear that too?" I nodded. The breathing grew louder, closer. A shape darker than the shadows moved toward the bunks. We froze, paralyzed, as it leaned over the bottom bed. I saw it bend toward Evan, its outline blotting out the faint glow from the window. Evan screamed. I jumped, slamming on the light switch. The room was empty, but the sheets on Evan's bunk were still pressed down, like someone had just been lying there. We never slept in that room again. Even now, years later, I live states away. Evan, too. The house has been renovated. The bunk bed's gone. But sometimes when the night gets too quiet, I wake to the sound of breathing. Slow, deep, steady, right beside me. And I know it isn't mine. Story 2. I never thought much about the way our house sounded at night until that winter. Growing up, I used to tell myself that silence was just another word for safety, that the absence of noise meant nothing bad could happen. But silence is deceptive. It isn't really empty. If you sit with it long enough, it starts whispering things you don't want to hear. My name is Ethan Blake, and when this happened, I was 15 years old. My little sister, Sophie, was 10. We lived with our parents in a small Massachusetts town called Clearwater Falls, a place so quiet you could hear the church bell 5 blocks away on Sunday mornings. Our neighborhood was the kind where dads mowed their lawns in perfect diagonal lines. Moms organized block parties in the summer, and kids left their bikes lying across sidewalks because nobody worried about theft. Our house was a 2-story colonial, white with green shutters and a front porch my dad swore he'd repaint every spring, but never did. The inside wasn't fancy. Old carpets, squeaky floorboards, wallpaper that peeled at the edges. But it was home. My dad, Mark Blake, worked long hours in construction, usually coming home sweaty with dust clinging to his boots. My mom, Caroline, taught literature at the local high school, which meant she came home with red pens in her pockets and stacks of essays to grade. And then there was Sophie. If you asked me back then, I would have said Sophie was weird. Not bad weird, just different. She had this habit of believing in things most kids had already let go of by 10. Fairies, monsters, angels, even Santa Claus long after other kids were calling it fake. Her imagination ran wild and she poured it out in her sketchbooks. She'd spend hours drawing castles, shadowy forests, or strange little creatures she swore she saw in dreams. I teased her constantly for it like any older brother would. But here's the thing, Sophie wasn't just imaginative, she was sensitive in a way I wasn't. She picked up on moods, details, and feelings that other people missed. Once at my cousin's birthday party, she walked up to my aunt and asked her why she was sad. My aunt laughed and brushed it off, but later that night we found out she'd just been diagnosed with breast cancer and hadn't told anyone. Stuff like that happened with Sophie all the time. Back then, though, I didn't think much of it. I just thought she was a kid who cried too easily and believed too much. It was January 2019 when it happened. Bitter cold, the kind of New England winter where the sky feels like cement pressing down on you. That Saturday, my parents had been invited to a colleague's anniversary party in Providence, Rhode Island. The plan was for them to leave after dinner and not get back until around 3 in the morning. I remember Mom giving me the speech in the kitchen while she zipped up her black winter coat. "Ethan, you're in charge tonight. No junk food after 11. Sophie goes to bed by 10, and don't let her stay up watching superhero movies. She'll be wired all night." I rolled my eyes. "Relax, Mom. I've got it under control." Dad put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Just keep the doors locked, son. You've got our numbers if you need anything." "We'll be fine," I said, trying to sound older than I felt. They kissed Sophie goodbye, and then the front door shut behind them. The house seemed to exhale into silence. Sophie begged to watch Spider-Man, Homecoming, in the living room. I gave in, popping popcorn while she curled under a blanket. For a while, everything felt normal. We laughed at the movie, argued about which superhero was cooler, and forgot we were technically alone. By the time the credits rolled, it was almost 11:30. "All right," I said, standing up. "Bedtime." Sophie groaned. "Come on, Ethan, one more episode of Stranger Things." "Just one." "Nope," I said firmly. "Mom's orders, teeth brushed, then bed." She stomped upstairs reluctantly, muttering about how unfair life was. I stayed back in the living room, flipping the channel to Logan, one of my favorite movies. Definitely not Sophie material. By the time it ended, I was half asleep on the couch. My phone buzzed. 2:04 a.m. I was just gathering the bowls when I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. When I turned, Sophie was standing halfway down. Her face was pale. "What are you doing up?" I whispered. She clutched the railing with both hands. "Ethan," her voice shook. "There's someone in my closet." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but Sophie wasn't smiling. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "You probably just heard the house creaking. It's windy tonight," I said. Her voice cracked. "Number, I saw him. He was standing in my closet. He told me he wanted to touch me." The way she said it, flat and terrified, froze my blood. "That's not funny," I snapped. "Don't say stuff like that." "I'm not joking, Ethan," she hissed. "He was tall with black hair. He was smiling at me." Something in her voice, trembling, dead serious, made my stomach twist. "All right," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Let's go check." We crept upstairs together. The hallway was dark except for the faint glow of a nightlight near her room. My heart hammered. I kept telling myself it was nothing. A jacket hanging weird, shadows playing tricks. When we reached her door, I flicked on the light. Her room looked normal. Pink curtains, stuffed animals, her sketchbooks piled on the desk. The only thing out of place was the closed closet door across the room. I forced a smirk. "See? Nothing here." I grabbed the knob and yanked it open, and froze. Inside, hunched beneath the doorframe, was a man. Tall, easily 6 feet. Greasy black hair clung to his pale face. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight at me. He looked about mid-40s, his jaw covered in dark stubble, and he was smiling. That smile didn't belong in a child's bedroom. For a split second, my brain refused to believe it. Monsters under the bed weren't real. Strangers didn't just appear in locked houses. But Sophie had been right. Rage boiled up inside me. He'd been watching her. He told her he wanted to touch her. I lunged, my fist connected with his throat. He gagged, stumbling forward. "Run, Sophie!" I shouted. She bolted, screaming down the hall. The man wheezed, clutching his neck. But he was stronger than I expected. He swung wildly, his hand grazing my jaw. Pain shot through my face. I stomped on his shin, then drove my knee into his stomach. He collapsed, gasping. But he didn't fight back the way I thought he would. He just kept smiling through the blood, his eyes locked on me like I was a joke. Terrified, I backed away and ran after Sophie. She had locked herself in the upstairs bathroom. I pounded on the door until she cracked it open. I slipped inside and slammed it shut. My hands shook as I dialed 911. "There's a man in our house," I gasped. "He was in my sister's closet. Please send someone now." The operator promised officers were on their way. I called my parents next, blurting everything through tears. Mom screamed into the phone, telling me to stay put. We sat huddled on the bathroom floor listening. Minutes passed. Then, creak. Floorboards groaned, slow footsteps in the hall. Sophie buried her face in my chest. I held her, praying the lock would hold. Finally, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the bathroom window. Police stormed the house. They found nothing. No broken windows, no forced entry, just blood smeared on Sophie's carpet where I'd hit him. "Are you sure you saw someone?" one officer asked gently. "I didn't imagine this," I snapped. "He was there. I hit him." The officers exchanged looks but didn't argue. One stayed parked outside until dawn. A week passed. I barely slept. Sophie refused to go near her room, sleeping in mine instead. Every creak made us jump. Then the call came. The police had arrested a man in a nearby town, hiding in an abandoned shed. His name was Gerald Pike, 46 years old, a drifter with a history of trespassing, burglary, and child endangerment. He matched my description exactly. He'd been breaking into homes for months, sneaking into children's rooms at night. If Sophie hadn't seen him, if I hadn't opened that closet, the thought still makes me sick. It's been years, but I can't walk past Sophie's room without picturing that smile in the dark. I keep wondering how long he'd been there, how many nights he might have been watching her without us knowing. Sophie doesn't draw fairies or castles anymore. She doesn't talk about monsters either, because she knows they're real. And sometimes, late at night, when the house settles into silence, I swear I hear the creak of floorboards. And I wonder if maybe Gerald Pike wasn't alone. Story 3. I never realized how fragile the balance in a family could be until the year everything began to unravel inside my own home. Back then, I was 17 years old and living in a quiet Midwest town called Ashwood, Indiana, a place you drive through without even noticing. We had one grocery store, a diner everyone went to after Friday night football games, and endless stretches of cornfields that swallowed the horizon. Life there was predictable, ordinary, or at least it seemed that way. My parents weren't extraordinary people, but they worked hard. My dad, Michael Hayes, was a mechanic at a small auto shop in town. Grease-stained hands, long hours, but always the kind of man who'd find time to check my car before winter or help neighbors with their lawnmower engines. My mom, Diana Hayes, was a nurse at the county hospital. 12-hour shifts, sometimes overnight, yet still the one who managed to keep the house together. It was just the four of us for as long as I could remember. Me, Mom, Dad, and my little brother Ethan. He was 4 years younger than me. That made him 13 the year things went bad. And Ethan had always been different. Even as a kid, he wasn't the bubbly, easygoing type most parents brag about. He was intense, clingy with Mom, distant with Dad, and almost always hovering just close enough to watch me without saying much. He had this unnerving way of staring. Too long, too still, like he was trying to peel back layers of who you were without speaking a word. I used to laugh it off. That's just Ethan being weird. But the truth is, part of me never quite understood him. Still, he was my brother. And in families, you learn to accept people as they are, until everything changed. It was a crisp October evening when Mom sat us down at the dining table. The smell of pot roast filled the air, steam rising from the plates she'd set before us. Dad sat at the head of the table, unusually quiet, almost as if he were bracing for something. Mom tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her face lit with a nervous smile. "There's something I need to tell you both," she began, her voice softer than usual. She glanced at Dad, who reached over and squeezed her hand. I raised a brow. "Okay, what's going on?" Mom took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a spark before a fire. My fork clattered against the plate. "Wait, seriously?" She nodded, eyes watering just a little. "Yes, you're going to have another sibling." For a second, shock rooted me in place. Then, strangely, excitement bubbled in my chest. I'd secretly always wanted a sister, someone different from Ethan, someone I could bond with in a way I couldn't with him. Wow, Mom," I said, smiling. "That's amazing." But across the table, Ethan's reaction was nothing like mine. His face twisted, and he shoved his chair back with a screech. "I don't want another baby," he muttered. "I want things to stay the same." Dad's tone was gentle but firm. "Ethan, you'll be a big brother now. That's special." "I don't care," Ethan snapped, his voice sharp as glass. Then he stormed off toward his room, footsteps pounding up the stairs. I stared after him, uneasy. "He'll get over it," I said finally, but the knot forming in my stomach told me otherwise. By the time Lily was born the following spring, my world had shifted. I remember standing in that bright hospital room, fluorescent lights buzzing above, watching my mom cradle a tiny bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. Lily's face peeked out, soft pink cheeks, wisps of dark hair, eyes squeezed shut as she yawned the smallest yawn I'd ever seen. "She's beautiful," I whispered. Mom smiled tiredly and handed her to me. The second Lily rested in my arms, something inside me clicked. A rush of protectiveness swelled in my chest. She was fragile, helpless, and mine to protect. But when Mom turned to Ethan, asking gently if he wanted to hold his baby sister, he shook his head sharply. His lips pressed into a hard line. "No." "Ethan," Mom started. "I don't like her," he said coldly. The room went silent. Mom gave him a strained smile, as though hoping it was just a childish phase. Dad put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You'll warm up to her. You'll see." But Ethan didn't warm up. He grew colder. The months that followed were chaos. Mom's maternity leave ended after 3 months, and Dad couldn't take more time off, which meant I was often the one looking after Lily when I wasn't at school. I didn't mind. I loved her. I'd rock her to sleep, change her, even hum softly to her at night when the house fell into silence. But Ethan avoided her. If she cried, he covered his ears and yelled for someone to make it stop. If Mom or Dad cooed over her, Ethan sulked or threw tantrums. One night at dinner, while Lily babbled in her high chair, Ethan muttered loud enough for me to hear, "I wish she wasn't here." I looked at him sharply. "Don't say that. She ruined everything." "Ethan," I whispered angrily. "She's a baby. She didn't ruin anything." His lips curved into the faintest smirk. "You'll see." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. It was early June, the kind of hot, sticky summer afternoon where the cicadas screamed outside and the air felt heavy. Mom and Dad both had shifts that overlapped, and usually Grandma came over to babysit. But that day she had an appointment she couldn't miss. Mom kissed me on the cheek before leaving. "It's just until dinner," she said. "You've got this. Call us if you need anything." I nodded. "Don't worry, I'll take care of them." The first hour was fine. Lily was upstairs napping, her soft whimpers drifting through the baby monitor. Ethan sat cross-legged on the living room floor, playing with his action figures. The TV hummed in the background. Then Lily started crying. At first I thought it was the usual hungry cry. I sighed, set the remote down, and started up the stairs. But halfway up, something made me freeze. The cry wasn't normal. It was sharp, panicked, like she was in pain. "Ethan," I called, my voice tight. "What's going on?" No answer. Heart hammering, I bolted up the stairs. That's when I heard it, running water. The bathroom door was open. Light spilled into the hallway, and there, inside, my blood turned to ice. Lily was lying in the bathtub, her tiny body squirming, her face red as she screamed. Water gushed from the faucet, scalding hot, steam curling into the air. And Ethan stood over her. His hand rested on the faucet knob, his expression calm, too calm. "Ethan!" I screamed, rushing forward. I yanked Lily out of the tub, shutting the water off with my other hand. Her skin was red but not blistered. I wrapped her trembling body in a towel, rocking her as tears stung my eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "You could have burned her alive." Ethan's face was blank. Then slowly, he smirked. "She deserves it." My stomach dropped. "Are you insane? She's a baby." "She took everything from me," he said flatly. "They don't love me anymore. They only love her." "That's not true," I cried. "You're their son too. You're my brother. But this is sick, Ethan." He shrugged as if none of it mattered. "I don't care." I clutched Lily tighter, rocking her until her sobs softened. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't leave her side the rest of that day. When Mom and Dad came home, I told them everything. My voice shook as I described what I'd seen. Mom's face drained of color. She snatched Lily from my arms, clutching her as if she might vanish. Dad's jaw tightened, his eyes burning holes into Ethan. "Is this true?" Dad demanded. Ethan just stared back, silent. "Answer me," Dad yelled. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I don't like her." "I never will." Mom burst into tears. Dad ran a hand down his face. "That's it. He needs help." They enrolled him in therapy the next week. The counselor said jealousy was common, that siblings often struggled to adjust. But I knew deep down this wasn't ordinary. The look in Ethan's eyes that day, calm, almost pleased, while Lily screamed, was something I'd never forget. And even now, years later, whenever I visit home and see Ethan sitting at the dinner table, quiet, polite, older now, I catch him glancing at Lily, and sometimes he smiles, that same faint smirk, the kind that makes my blood run cold. Story 4. I used to tell myself that family was a shield. No matter how bitter life became, no matter how hard the world pressed against you, there was always family, something unshakable to lean on. I don't tell myself that anymore. I grew up in a Rust Belt town in western Pennsylvania called Ashford, tucked between the Monongahela River and a sprawl of coal plants that cough black dust into the air. The kind of place where the train whistles shook your windows at night, and everyone's paycheck depended on the mills, directly or indirectly. My father, Raymond Burke, worked maintenance at one of those plants, 16-hour shifts, calluses like iron on his hands. My mother, Janet, was a night nurse at the county hospital, always moving in a daze, smelling of disinfectant and cheap coffee. That left me and my older brother, Aaron, to fend for ourselves most of the time. Aaron was 3 years older, but it always felt like a lifetime separated us. He had the size, the voice, the confidence. I had none of that. I was the scrawny, quiet one, a book in my hands when other kids had baseball gloves. I trailed behind Aaron everywhere we went as kids, across cracked sidewalks, through the alleys where older boys smoked and spat, like a shadow desperate to be acknowledged. Sometimes he let me tag along. Other times he shoved me off, sneering, "Quit following me, Dylan. You're pathetic." When our little sister Sophie was born, 10 years after me, 13 after Aaron, something shifted. For the first time I saw Aaron soften. I caught him rocking her crib when she cried, muttering little lullabies he'd never admit to knowing. He'd call her Bug, and she'd beam with a smile so wide it erased all the tension in the house. But the peace never lasted. In homes like ours, it rarely does. Dad's drinking grew worse after the mill announced layoffs. A bottle of whiskey was always half empty by the recliner. Mom came home with lines under her eyes so deep it looked like she hadn't slept in years. And Aaron, he absorbed it all. By 16, his charm had curdled into cruelty. He mocked my grades, my skinny arms, my loneliness. He called me weak, worthless, just like Dad once called him. He never hit Sophie, but his words could cut her deeper than a belt ever could. Still, I clung to hope. Maybe it was a phase. Maybe he'd outgrow it. Deep down, though, I knew better. By spring of 1984, our world collapsed. Dad died of a heart attack on the job. One moment he was climbing scaffolding, the next he was on the concrete floor, gone before the ambulance ever arrived. Mom drowned herself in double shifts, too numb or too exhausted to grieve. That left me, 17, and Aaron, 20, to keep things afloat. Aaron had already dropped out of community college. He spent his days drinking in the basement with the same pack of burnouts who hung around the old service station. No job, no plans, just bitterness simmering in a bottle. And then came Lena. She wasn't some passing fling. She was mine first. I met her at the public library in the quiet stacks where I spent most afternoons hiding from the noise of the house. She loved the same books I did, Steinbeck, Bradbury. She smiled at me like I wasn't invisible. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. But Lena, like everyone else, got pulled into Aaron's orbit. He had that rough confidence, that magnetic cruelty. Before long, she was his. He didn't even bother to hide it. I remember the night I confronted him in the basement. My hands were shaking, but I forced the words out. "Why her, Aaron?" "You knew she was with me." He smirked, leaning back in his chair with a beer bottle dangling from his fingers. "She chose, Dylan. Face it. No girl's gonna stick with a weakling like you." Those words stayed lodged in my chest like broken glass. Easter Sunday, 1984, was when it all came apart. Mom insisted we host dinner at the house. "Tradition," she said, her voice brittle but determined. She wanted something, anything, to feel the same. Aaron showed up late, reeking of whiskey, Lena trailing behind him. With her came her 2 kids from her previous relationship, toddlers with wide, uncertain eyes. Sophie, now 14, floated around the house with a mix of innocence and unease, sensing the storm building. Dinner was unbearable. I sat in silence, sipping watered-down beer, while Aaron chipped away at me in front of everyone. My grades, my failure to get into college, my uselessness. Mom told him to shut up, but her words carried no weight anymore. At one point, Aaron leaned close, his voice low enough for only me. "You know, if you were half a man, Lena would have stayed with you. She made the right call." My fork trembled in my hand. Sophie's eyes flicked toward me, like she could feel the eruption building. After dinner, the kids scrambled outside to hunt for Easter eggs. The sun was sinking, shadows long across the backyard. In the kitchen, Mom and Lena cleared dishes. Aaron poured another drink, leaning against the counter, smirking like he'd won some war I hadn't realized we were fighting. Something in me cracked. I excused myself, went upstairs and opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside was Dad's .38 revolver, wrapped in cloth. He kept it for protection, though we all knew it was more a threat during his drunken rages. I hadn't touched it in years, but my hands moved like they belonged to someone else. When I walked back downstairs, the laughter of children drifted in from the yard. Aaron glanced up, sneer curling his lips. "What's that, Dylan? Finally grow a backbone?" For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice calm. Too calm. Aaron's grin faltered. "Put it down, you little—" The revolver thundered. His body jerked, crashing against the counter, blood spreading across the linoleum. Lena screamed. I turned, and the gun roared again. Mom froze, a dish still in her hands, her eyes wide, her mouth forming words that never came. Pity? Fear? Maybe both. My finger pulled the trigger once more. The children came running, laughter replaced by screams. Sophie's voice pierced above them all. "Dylan, please stop! Please!" But I couldn't. My vision tunneled, my body detached. The revolver barked again and again until the screams were swallowed by silence. When it was over, the house was drenched in red. 11 bodies scattered across the rooms. My family, my tormentors, my only constants. Gone. I sat on the couch, revolver heavy in my lap, staring at nothing. Hours blurred past before I finally lifted the phone, dialing with numb fingers. "I killed them," I said simply. When the police arrived, one officer vomited in the yard. Another muttered, "Jesus Christ." Under his breath, they handcuffed me without resistance. The trial that followed consumed the town. Neighbors swore they couldn't believe I was capable of violence. My lawyer argued insanity. Years of emotional abuse, depression, isolation. But the jury knew. This wasn't madness. This was rage. Cold, deliberate. 11 life sentences. No parole. Now, decades later, I sit in a concrete cell, my body withered, my hands trembling with age. I replay that Easter Sunday every night. I hear Sophie's voice screaming my name. I see Aaron's face in that final instant. No mockery, no cruelty, just fear. I used to believe family was a shield, but family was the knife. It cut me open, piece by piece. And in the end, I used that knife on them. That is the legacy I will carry to my grave. Story 5. I never thought the worst night of my life would begin so quietly. My name is Evan Carter, and I grew up in a small industrial town in Maple Hollow, Ohio, a place where the factories hummed like an endless background song, and the houses all leaned a little from decades of coal dust and winters that bit too hard. On the surface, we looked like any other family on our block. My dad, Mark, worked double shifts at the steel plant. My mom, Linda, kept the house spotless, the kind of spotless where a glass on the counter looked like a crime scene. And then there was my older sister, Rachel. Rachel was 2 years older than me, and she wasn't just my sister. She was everything. My protector, my partner in crime, the loud, reckless counterweight to my quiet, cautious nature. If I got cornered by kids at school, Rachel showed up with her sharp tongue and quicker fists. If I wanted to sneak into the old quarry after dark, she was already there, grinning, daring me to keep up. But there was something else in our house, something that aided us slowly. My mom's resentment toward Rachel. It wasn't obvious to the outside world. Neighbors saw a polite, tidy woman who smiled at bake sales, but inside our house, her words cut Rachel to pieces. Rachel was too loud. Rachel never listened. Rachel's grades were never enough. My mom gave me a strange, sugary sweetness, but with Rachel, she was cold steel. Dad tried to step in, but his long shifts and tired sighs left him powerless. Rachel laughed it off in front of everyone, but I knew. Late at night, when it was just the two of us in our small, creaking rooms, she'd whisper things like, "She never wanted me here." And I'd hear the wobble in her voice that she never let anyone else hear. Still, Rachel kept me smiling, until the night she disappeared. It was October. The air smelled like burning leaves, and the wind rattled the shutters just enough to sound like fingernails on wood. We'd eaten dinner, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the usual, and Rachel slipped on her old denim jacket. "Going to meet Jenna," she said, lacing up her boots. "Be back before 10, Dad called from the recliner, not looking up from the muted football game. Mom didn't even answer. She just wiped the counter harder, her jaw tight. Rachel winked at me before stepping out into the dark. "Don't fall asleep before I get back, little brother. You'll miss the ghost stories." But she never came back. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my dad sobbing downstairs. The sound gutted me. I had never in my life heard my father cry. I patted down in my socks and found him hunched forward on the couch, face in his hands. Mom sat stiff beside him, her face dry, lips tight. "Dad?" My voice cracked. He lifted his head, eyes swollen and red. Rachel's gone." "Gone?" I said. "She probably just stayed at Jenna's." "She never showed up there," Dad interrupted. His voice was gravel. "The police came this morning. They're looking." I turned to Mom, desperate. "She'll come back, right?" Mom's eyes stayed on the floor. She ran away. Flat, cold. Dad's head snapped toward her. "Linda!" "Well, what else would you call it?" she hissed. "She's always been reckless." Something inside me broke. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. "She wouldn't leave me," I whispered, not without saying something. But the days turned into weeks. Flyers with Rachel's face curled on telephone poles, rain warping the paper. Police came and went, their questions going nowhere. Eventually, the case went cold. Our house died with it. Dad spent nights drinking alone in the garage, the reek of whiskey clinging to him. I cried myself to sleep more times than I could count. And Mom seemed lighter. She hummed while she cooked. She cleaned like she was preparing for guests that never came. Her shoulders straightened, her eyes softened. Like a storm had passed. It made me sick. 2 months later, December, the cold was sharp enough to crack skin. I lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence press in. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hall. Light. Fast. My chest seized. And then, laughter. Not just any laugh. Rachel's. I sat up so fast I nearly toppled my lamp. My heart thundered as I whispered into the dark, "Rachel." She stood at the foot of my bed. Same messy hair, same crooked grin, same denim jacket. "Pranked you?" she said, her voice exactly the same. Yet, not. I stumbled forward, tears burning my eyes. "Where were you? Do you know what you put us through? Do you know?" But Rachel only laughed harder. It wasn't the laugh I knew. It was sharper, broken, like glass under a boot. "Come on, Evan," she said. "Let's go play in Mom and Dad's room." Her request froze me. We'd never played in there. But I'd missed her so much I didn't question it. We ran down the hall together. I burst into my parents' room shouting, "Dad, Mom, look, it's Rachel. She's back." Dad jerked awake, groggy, squinting. "Evan, what the hell are you talking about?" "She's right here," I pointed frantically. Dad's face crumpled. He pulled me into his arms, whispering, "You're dreaming, buddy. I miss her too." But Mom wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Rachel, and her face was white. Her lips trembled. Her eyes widened in pure terror. "You see her?" I hissed. Rachel's grin widened, wider than it should. Her teeth turned black, jagged. Her eyes burned red, her pupils swallowed by shadow. And then she sat down, on the exact spot on the bed, at the exact time of night. Mom let out a strangled sob, because that was the place. That was the night she killed her. The truth slammed into me like ice water. My mother's hatred, Rachel's disappearance, her strange lightness afterward. My voice cracked. "Mom, what did you do?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Rachel's voice dropped, deep and cold. "Now she sees me too." And then she vanished. Life after that night was a slow collapse. Dad never knew the truth, but suspicion gnawed at him. He and Mom drifted apart, their marriage dissolving into silence. I carried the weight of what I'd seen, the truth I couldn't tell. I hated her. I hated my mother more than words could ever carry. But the worst part, Rachel never really left. Some nights I'd wake to footsteps in the hall, a low laugh outside my door, a shadow leaning in the crack just beyond the light. She was there, always there, not just haunting Mom, haunting me too, and I don't know if she'll ever stop. Story 6, I never thought I would spend so much of my 20s thinking about death. Not in a vague, distant way, like some abstract idea you only talk about after a funeral or in a philosophy class, but in a way that feels personal, close, like it's following me through my days, waiting for the right moment to reach out and touch me. My name is Maya Carter. I'm 24 years old and I grew up in Everett, Washington, a quiet city tucked between gray skies and endless pine trees. My brother Ethan is 3 years older than me, 27 now. For as long as I can remember, he has been my anchor. When our parents divorced, I was 9. Ethan was 12. He stepped into this strange role of being not just my brother, but also my protector. Mom worked doubles at the hospital, Dad left for another family in Oregon, and most nights it was just Ethan and me heating up frozen dinners, finishing homework under the dim kitchen light, and making each other laugh when the silence of the house felt too heavy. Ethan always said something weird when we were kids. "You know, May, I think you and I aren't supposed to be two people. I think God screwed up, tried to make one person, and accidentally split us in half." He'd laugh after saying it, but even as a kid I noticed the weight in his voice, like he half believed it. We carried each other through everything. High school breakups, Dad's silence, Mom's exhaustion. Ethan was the steady one, the reason I didn't fall apart when I left for college, and I thought nothing could ever change that. But then came last summer. Ethan had been working at a small auto shop, saving up for something big. I just finished a brutal year at college where I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. One night, he tossed me his car keys and said, "Let's get out of Everett. Just drive until the car doesn't want to drive anymore." And I said yes, because I always said yes to Ethan. We drove east, past the Cascades, through towns that looked half abandoned, stopping at cheap motels that smelled of bleach and cigarettes. For a week, it was perfect. Just us, bad diner coffee, and long talks about who we wanted to be. For the first time in years, it felt like being kids again. Then came that night in Billings, Montana. It was just past midnight. We pulled into a lonely gas station on the edge of town. Two buzzing lights lit up the parking lot. The store itself looked empty except for a tired cashier scrolling through her phone. I went inside to grab snacks while Ethan stayed near the car. When I came back out, the world felt wrong. Ethan was standing by the pump, frozen. His eyes were locked on someone across the lot. At first, I thought it was some stranger messing with him, but my stomach turned cold. The man standing under the buzzing light looked exactly like Ethan. Not just similar, not just the same haircut or same build. No, this was him. Same broad shoulders, same crooked nose from when he broke it in middle school, even the faint scar along his jawline. Same way his hands hung a little tense at his sides. It was like looking at two versions of the same photograph, except one of them was wrong. They stared at each other, mirrored, unblinking. The other Ethan spoke first, his voice carrying across the lot. It was Ethan's voice. "Who are you?" My brother's lips parted, but no sound came out. I whispered, terrified, "Ethan." The silence was unbearable. Then my brother suddenly backed away. His hands shook. His chest rose and fell like he couldn't breathe. He ran straight past me, into the car. "Get in, Maya, now!" I scrambled in, and before I could even close the door, he floored it. Tires screeched against asphalt as we tore out of the lot. I twisted around to look back. The other Ethan stood under the buzzing lamp, still, watching us go. His face, my brother's face, looked almost disappointed. That night in the motel, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. It wasn't real. Tell me it wasn't real, Maya. But I had seen it too. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were bloodshot. If you see your double, it means you're going to die. I've heard that before. It's an omen. I shook my head. That's just an old superstition. You're fine. But he didn't believe me. And maybe I didn't believe myself either. Days after that, Ethan changed. His body ached. His skin dried and cracked, like it was aging too fast. Doctors ran tests, confused, muttering things like, "I've never seen anything like this before." Ethan grew restless, desperate. He exercised until his muscles shook. He swallowed handfuls of vitamins. At night, I'd wake and find him staring at his reflection, touching his face as though making sure it was still his. Sometimes, when the light flickered, I swore I saw another figure in the mirror, just behind him. One night, he woke up screaming. I rushed to him. He sobbed into my arms, shaking. "I saw him again," he gasped. He was lying on the ground, burned to ash. He looked at me before he crumbled. His skin was cracking worse than ever, tiny fractures spreading like porcelain, faint blood seeping out. He whispered, "If I disappear, Maya, remember me." Maybe I was never supposed to be here. I hit his arm, tears streaming. "Don't say that. You're my brother. You're real. Don't you dare give up." He smiled weakly. "You always were the strong one." And then, impossibly, he got better. The more he fought, the more his body seemed to stabilize. The cracks faded. His strength returned. Within weeks, he looked healthier than ever, almost glowing. I wanted to believe it was over, that we'd outrun whatever that night in Billings meant. But something always nagged at me. If Ethan was here, alive and well, then where was the other Ethan? It's been 8 months. Life is almost normal again. Ethan works at the shop. I'm finishing school. We don't talk about that night, not directly, but sometimes I catch him staring out the window too long, and sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, sure I'll see him standing by my bed. Then, last week, it happened. I was walking back to my apartment after a late shift. The street was empty, the air heavy with rain. And there, under the flicker of a streetlight, stood Ethan. but Ethan was already home. This one smiled at me. His face, my brother's face, calm, almost gentle. "It's not supposed to be you, Maya," he said softly. "But maybe it will be." And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. I ran the rest of the way home, heart pounding so hard I could taste blood. When I burst through the door, Ethan was on the couch, half asleep, alive, real. He looked up at me, confused. "May, what's wrong?" I couldn't answer, because I knew what was wrong. If there are two of him, two halves of a mistake, then maybe one still has to burn. And what terrifies me most isn't the thought of losing my brother. It's the thought that next time it won't be him. It'll be me. Story 7. I never used to think twice about babysitting my little brother. Not until the year everything started to change. My name is Ethan Price, and I grew up in a small Midwestern town called Ashwood, Indiana, a quiet suburb where the biggest drama was whose lawn looked the best on Sunday morning. For most of my life, it was just me and my parents. I was their only kid for 16 years, and I got used to it. I was the one they showed off at parent-teacher nights, the one whose drawings cluttered the fridge, the one my dad taught how to throw a baseball, and my mom took on library trips every Saturday. Then came Caleb. He wasn't planned, at least not in the way my parents planned me. My mom once called him their second-chance baby, her little miracle at 40. At first, I didn't know how to feel about him. I had spent my whole life as the center of their world, and suddenly here was this tiny red-faced thing who cried at all hours and stole every ounce of their attention. But then something shifted. Caleb was small, smaller than most babies, and fragile. And when he wrapped his tiny hand around my finger, I felt something I'd never expected: protectiveness. By the time he turned 2, I was less of an older brother and more of a part-time babysitter. My dad was a police officer working long overnight shifts. My mom was an ICU nurse at St. Mary's, gone from afternoon to well past midnight. That left me, a junior in high school, in charge most evenings. I didn't mind, not at first. Caleb was sweet, funny in the way toddlers are. He waddled around the living room in his dinosaur pajamas, carried his ragged stuffed bear everywhere, and clapped whenever I played music for him on my phone. But it didn't take long for me to realize that there was something different about him. And it all started one Thursday night. It was late October, one of those crisp evenings when the wind rattled the last brown leaves against the siding of the house. Caleb and I were curled up in the living room, the TV glowing with some cartoon he loved. He sat cross-legged, his blanket bunched in his lap, eyes glued to the screen. I half-watched, scrolling through my phone, until I felt him tug at my sleeve. "Hungry," he said in that broken way toddlers do. "Okay, buddy," I smiled, slipping my phone into my pocket. "Dinner time." I stepped into the kitchen, pulling open cabinets when it happened. A scream, not the startled cry of a 2-year-old, but a blood-curdling shriek that jolted through me like electricity. I dropped the box of pasta, heart pounding, and sprinted back to the living room. Caleb sat on the couch, his stuffed bear clutched to his chest, his eyes wide as if he'd just seen something terrible. "Caleb, what's wrong? What happened?" My eyes scanned the room, the curtains, the window, the hallway beyond. Nothing, just us. Then suddenly, his face twisted into a grin I'd never seen before. Too wide, too deliberate, and he said, clear as a bell, "I got you." Not broken toddler speech, not the stammering of a 2-year-old, perfect, crisp, like a practiced line. I froze. He was only 2. He could barely string words together. But this was flawless. I forced a laugh, ruffling his hair. "Scared me half to death, Squirt." But inside I felt something not tight in my chest. 2 nights later, I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables when I felt him toddle in behind me, dragging his stuffed bear by one leg. "Danny," he said suddenly. I turned. "What?" "Danny." He pointed toward the dark hallway beyond the kitchen. "Man in the hallway." My skin prickled. "Caleb, my name's not Danny. It's Ethan." But his little finger stayed pointed, eyes locked on the empty stretch of carpet. I stared too. every nerve in me waiting for movement, for a shadow, for anything. My brain scrambled. Had I left a door unlocked? Could someone be in the house? I grabbed the nearest thing, a butter knife, and stepped toward the hallway. Each footstep was heavy, my throat dry. I peeked around the corner. Nothing, just the beige carpet, the closed doors of the bedrooms, and the faint hum of the fridge behind me. When I came back, Caleb was smiling, a strange, satisfied smile. The weeks after that were worse. Sometimes we'd be playing with blocks, and he'd stop mid-stack, stare at the wall, and whisper, "Baby on the wall." Other times he'd laugh at nothing, not the bubbly giggle of a toddler, but a low, sharp laugh that didn't sound like it belonged in his small chest at all. The worst was one night around 3 a.m. I'd been cramming for a history test when I heard him crying. I stepped into his room, the orange nightlight casting a glow across the crib. "Caleb?" I whispered. He sat up, tears streaking his cheeks. When he saw me, he pointed at the closet. "The man," he whispered. "Man in the closet." The door was cracked open, blackness yawning inside. Every instinct screamed at me not to check, but I couldn't leave it. I swallowed and stepped forward, hand trembling as I swung the door shut. Just clothes, just shadows. I scooped Caleb into my arms. "You're sleeping in my room tonight, buddy." But as I carried him out, his lips brushed my ear. His voice clear, perfect. "I want to stay with the man." My parents didn't believe me when I told them. "Kids say creepy stuff all the time," Dad chuckled. "It's imagination. Don't scare yourself." But it wasn't normal. One Saturday morning, we were watching Finding Nemo. The part came where the fish were caught in a net, struggling. Caleb laughed, not joyfully but sharply. Cruel. Too old for him. When the fish escaped, cheering on the screen, I glanced down at him. His face wasn't happy, it was disappointed. After that, I started locking my door at night. I stopped staying up late. I avoided the hallway after dark, but his words echoed. Man in the hallway, man in the closet. I want to stay with the man, and I began to wonder if he wasn't imagining the man at all. Maybe the man was imagining him. It happened the last time I babysat him. It was a Friday. Mom and Dad were both working the night shift. Caleb fell asleep on the couch while I finished my homework. Around midnight, I carried him upstairs, tucked him in, and shut off the light. I was halfway down the stairs when I froze. A laugh. Low, mocking. Not Caleb's alone, but something deeper, older, layered beneath his small voice. Ethan." I turned slowly. He was standing at the top of the stairs, not in his crib anymore. His eyes wide and glassy, his grin stretched unnaturally. "The man says, 'Come play.'" The air shifted, colder, pressing against my skin, and in the corner of the upstairs hallway, just beyond the reach of light, I saw it, tall, still, watching. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then Caleb blinked, rubbed his eyes, yawned. "Hungry," he mumbled, his words broken again. The figure was gone. I never told my parents what I saw. Caleb is 4 now. He doesn't talk about the man anymore. But sometimes, when I pass his room at night, I hear him whispering. Not quite baby talk, not clear sentences, something in between. And sometimes, I swear I hear another voice whispering back.